Imagine waking up tomorrow to a government notice. It says you've got exactly 24 months to sell your family home, or you're facing 10 years in prison. Right? It sounds completely made up, like some extreme late-night internet conspiracy theory, but a major political party just accidentally admitted on live television that this was their actual, real-life plan for hundreds of thousands of legal residents. This isn't a drill. It's the chaotic inside story of a 24-hour political meltdown and exactly how it flipped the national housing debate completely on its head overnight.
I mean, think about it. What if the solution to our massive housing crisis wasn't just, stopping new foreign investors, but actively repossessing the homes they've already bought? Well, one political party actually tried to promise exactly that. This was supposed to be their flagship policy, the big silver bullet to fix housing affordability. But the whole thing completely dissolved in record time. Why? Because the moment they pushed it out there, they realized they actually had no idea who they were planning to kick out onto the street.
If we track how this unraveled over just a 24-hour window, it gives us this truly fascinating look at what happens when a really catchy political slogan slams face first into strict legal reality. The whole shebang started on a Thursday night with a massive, totally unforced error. Then it bled into Friday morning with these panicked social media clarifications, and finally, it culminated in an absolute live radio train wreck. Let's break down exactly how fast this moved.
Okay, so the unraveling literally kicks off on live television. High-profile MP Barnaby Joyce goes on the Bolt report and explicitly confirms that this aggressive new policy of forced property divestment is going to target permanent residents. He looked right into the camera, dead serious, and said they must become an Australian citizen to keep their homes. But here's the crazy part. Realizing the massive political risk of suddenly threatening legal, tax-paying residents, Joyce actually walked off set, made these frantic phone calls to party headquarters, and then came back to try and re-record the whole segment. He suddenly called the policy formative and tried to walk it all back, saying, oh, wait, permanent residents won't be forced to sell. But, the tape was already rolling.
But here is the critical detail that turns this from a simple media gaffe into a massive systemic failure. The contradiction wasn't a slip of the tongue. It stemmed directly from the party's own official platform. If you look at their written documentation, it literally states, quote, "We must stop the sale of property to non-residents and non-citizens." Now, under Australian law, permanent residents are technically non-citizens. So Barnaby Joyce's initial chaotic statement, it actually aligned perfectly with the literal text on their own website. It was literally a trap of their own making.
So, to contain the massive fallout, Pauline Hanson rushes out a formal statement clarifying that this 2-year forced sale order only applies to temporary visa holders and foreign citizens living overseas. But just stop and think about the sheer political tension happening here. You've got a populist party, one that's literally built on a rigid anti-immigration platform, and suddenly they're forced to actively and publicly defend the property rights of migrant communities, just to fix a PR crisis. It completely clashes with their entire broader message.
And just when it seemed like maybe, just maybe, the damage was contained, the chaos escalated again the very next morning. Senator Sean Bell goes on 2GB radio. The host presses him on a really basic execution question, like what would actually happen to temporary residents who just refused to sell their homes after the 2 years were up, and Bell just completely froze. He couldn't answer the question. Instead of giving a clear legal mechanism, he just called it an excellent question and admitted the policy was still being investigated. On live radio,
This right here exposed a massive vulnerability in how populist policy gets made. You can propose these radical, popular headlines all day long, but if you haven't actually drafted the complex rules required to enforce them, the whole thing falls apart under basic scrutiny. It got so bad that the radio host literally cut the interview short. He called the entire exchange an absolute train wreck, live on the air, told the senator to go get some clarity, and then just hung up on him. Unbelievable.
Now let's step back from the political theater for a second, because we really need to look at the visceral human impact here. For younger citizens who are completely priced out of today's housing market, the emotional appeal of aggressively returning homes to everyday Australians is incredibly powerful. Honestly, it's exactly why the party's poll numbers were rising in the first place. But on the flip side, a policy like this triggers genuine, immediate panic. Lots of permanent residents come from countries that strictly prohibit dual citizenship. So forcing them to choose between surrendering their original nationality or giving up their family home, that is a massive emotional crisis. We are talking about roughly 3 million temporary residents here, including like 730,000 New Zealand citizens. The scope of that kind of uncertainty is just staggering.
And adding even more friction to all of this is a pretty glaring contradiction happening behind the scenes. This sudden, aggressive policy push comes right as one nation's parliamentary wing is undergoing a big shakeup. driven by Barnaby Joyce defecting and the arrival of Senator Sean Bell. But this newly aligned populist team is actually heavily backed by financial alignments with mining magnate Gina Rinehart. Just recently, Joyce and Hansen billed taxpayers for flights to private events on a luxury cruise ship hosted by Rinehart herself. So naturally, critics are pointing to the optics here. You're pitching radical housing policies for everyday struggling citizens, while your top leaders are getting photographed at billionaire-funded luxury events. It's definitely a contrast.
But then, we have to look at the data. Because when you dig into the actual numbers driving this entire national debate, you hit a statistic that just completely shatters the entire premise. Ready for it? 0.03%.
Yeah, housing economists and policy experts are completely at odds with this whole populist narrative. According to the Australian Taxation Office, foreign nationals own approximately 40,000 residential properties. Now, 40,000 sounds like a lot until you realize that is just 0.03% of the nation's 10.9 million total dwellings. It's a drop in the ocean. Experts are pointing out that even if you forcefully took back every single one of those homes, this tiny sliver of the market, it mathematically would do almost nothing to fix domestic prices or the rental shortage. The massive reality gap between the political panic being sold and the actual economic data is just undeniable.
And honestly, even if a government really wanted to push this through regardless of the data, they'd immediately hit a massive constitutional brick wall. Legal scholars are quick to point out that under Section 51XXI of the Australian Constitution, the federal government can only acquire property on just terms. In plain English, that means fair market value compensation. Any attempt to just arbitrarily repossess homes without paying full market value would be instantly struck down by the High Court. You simply cannot legislate away fundamental property rights without triggering massive constitutional protections. It's just not going to happen.
Plus, just think about the actual logistics of trying to enforce something like this. It would be a total, unmitigated nightmare. Right after that radio train wreck we talked about, Senator Bell's office suggested using the Foreign Acquisitions and Takeovers Act to hand out 10-year prison sentences and massive fines for noncompliance. But identifying, tracking, and then prosecuting disposal orders across millions of temporary residents, that would require an absolutely astronomical expansion of government bureaucracy. And guess who ultimately bears the cost of that giant administrative headache? Yep, the taxpayers.
So, looking forward, what does this all mean? Well, the ripple effects of this 24-hour meltdown are already shifting political strategies across the board. You can definitely expect to see one nation quietly try to professionalize its platform, pivoting away from these messy, retroactive repossessions and moving toward legally viable stuff, like vacancy taxes and higher application fees. Meanwhile, and this always happens historically, when minor parties surge with an idea, major parties adapt. We're already seeing the coalition, led by Angus Taylor, trying to capture these exact same voters by adopting sanitized, safer versions of the stance, like proposing strict limits on migration tied directly to housing construction. But the bottom line? Any radical laws attempting retroactive asset stripping are going to face inevitable, fatal stalemates in the High Court.
Ultimately, this incredibly chaotic 24-hour meltdown leaves us with a really critical insight. When a catchy political slogan moves faster than basic legal reality, the people who end up paying the heaviest price are just everyday residents who are simply looking for a bit of security. The gap between what sounds amazing on a television panel and what can actually be executed legally in a courtroom, well, that's exactly where political promises go to die.
Which brings us to a massive question, one that hits right at the absolute heart of our national identity. Can a government ever truly justify rewriting the rules of property ownership for non-citizens just to protect domestic buyers? Or does threatening the security of legal residents cross a dangerous line that ultimately damages Australia's reputation on the global stage? I want to open this up to the Frontier Forum, our ongoing community debate right here on Australia News Frontier. Head down to the comments right now and let us know exactly where you draw the line on this policy showdown.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.